Please share with us why you are the best candidate to represent the state of Louisiana in the United States Senate.
I believe I'm the best candidate because I represent the average American, not a political elite. I'm not handpicked by either party. We're running because I felt a call on my heart to run to serve and to serve our communities and to serve our state to the best of my abilities.
All right, question number 2. Please summarize for us your top 3 priorities and how you can affect change in those areas.
My top 3 would probably be maintaining our liberties. Most important to me right now are medical liberties with everything we have going on. Then it would be education and criminal justice reform are my top 3. The medical freedom, most of that's basically here lately with they're talking about mandating the vaccines, and a lot of states are starting to get rid of their exemptions. So there's probably going to be court cases coming in the near future, and I would like to handle it at the federal level to where we can't pass a law or a federal law that would mandate it across the country. Either way you sit on the vaccine issue, there should never be a limitation on liberty and then the federal government forcing you. With education, the big thing with me is the size and scope of the federal government is to rein it back in. I feel like with a lot of the standards we have set at the federal level, it cuts into the time that our local school districts and our teachers get to actually teach our children, because we're always so worried about standardized testing. If those scores are low, we lose funding for our schools. I think that is damaging to the students. And then I would like them to teach more American history and civics. I feel like we lack in that area. There's a lot of kids graduating at 18 years old and they're ready to vote, but they don't truly understand the way our political system works in our country. And then the criminal justice reform, we all make decisions, but there's a lot of decisions you can make when you're young that affect you for the rest of your life. And some of those wind up being felonies. I knew guys when I was growing up that went around in pickup trucks and would hit a mailbox with a baseball bat. And it's dangerous and it's ignorant to do, but that could lead to a felony offense in which you would never be able to vote and own a firearm. And you can petition it and eventually it goes away. But I believe we should have some kind of second chance program that after a certain number of years, you could have that removed, have that limitation removed, get your voting rights back, get your right to own a firearm, and the right to serve for the state and run, hold office and things of that nature.
What are the biggest threats to our regional economy, and what role do you believe Congress has in helping us respond to those threats?
Well, our regional economy, most of our economy is oil and gas work, and then forestry are our lifebloods in our state. Where we're at right now, there's no real way to the only way to diversify, I believe, would be handled on the state level. That would be we're at really high tax rate in Louisiana for business taxes, and it's hard to move into the state. When you do move in, anything you bring with you, your assets are taxed on top of all the cost to move here. So that's one area that we struggle, but that would be a state level. At the federal level, I'm not real big on the federal being involved with state legislation and the federal being involved with state decisions. I believe every state is a sovereign state, and they have the right to govern themselves separate of the federal government. The federal government, in my opinion, the biggest job of the federal government is to protect your constitutional rights and defend those liberties that were granted to you by God and limited to the government by the Constitution. So when it comes to local, taking public money and giving it to private corporations, or even putting it back into our local economies, I'm not a fan, because you're taxed at the state level. The taxes you pay on a state and local level are supposed to be for your localities and your state. Your federal taxes are supposed to be for the federal level. So when you start to intermingle to me, it's almost that we're already double taxed on a lot of things. You start to triple and quadruple tax. And at some point, we have to draw a line and say we're either going to stop spending or we have to stop spending. There's no other option. And we have to, we're already taxed a lot. You know, anybody that goes to the store knows here in Louisiana, you're paying 10% tax on top of whatever you buy, not including when you go get gas, the gas tax the state has, the federal level has. It's just, if you buy something, you pay taxes. When you sell it, you're expected to pay taxes. It's a never ending. There's so many double and triple taxes that it's sickening. So I would want to stop the flow, not necessarily the flow of money to the states to help for like natural disasters and things. But when you start talking about the like roadways, and I mean, this is why we pay property taxes. This is why we're paying a consumption tax for fuel. This is why we pay our local taxes. We're supposed to be handling all that at the state level. So if it's not being handled, I don't think the federal government should be overly involved. They need to remove themselves from a lot of state decisions, in my opinion.
All right, question 4. In your opinion, what are the key industries in the Shreveport-Bossier region today, and where do you believe we should be positioning ourselves for the future?
Well, like I said earlier, our region, really our whole state, is oil and gas and forestry. And I know Shreveport and Bossier are big on oil and gas. If I'm correct, I believe that's the number one revenue generating industry is the oil and gas in and around Shreveport. And I know you have Pratt paper mill right there outside of Shreveport. So I understand that is the economy. And for the future is hard to predict. You know, we talk a lot about green energy and maybe producing into that field. But Louisiana's infrastructure is kind of behind a lot of places around the country as far as our internet speeds and oh man, I had a little bit of a brain fart. The fiber optics, you know, throughout the state, we're falling behind in a lot of areas as far as infrastructure goes. The roadways in Shreveport, that's something we could talk about state and local. The roadways in Shreveport are horrendous right now. I-20 is a mess when you cross through. So I'm not sure where the future is to move forward. I know that we could probably do better if we were more competitive, if our tax rates were more competitive, if our local areas were more competitive with other states as far as bringing in business. Shreveport's a beautiful town. It's an older town, but it has a lot to offer. There's a lot of potential in Shreveport. A lot of times I feel like maybe if we got the government out of the way a little bit, we could allow these businesses to come back in and start to make headway. I think probably the biggest thing is going to be getting these small businesses back from the pandemic, is to get these small businesses back up and going and get the downtown area back and reclaim it, something like what West Monroe did with their downtown areas, to bring back commerce and get people back into these older buildings and dress it up and bring the history back and start to celebrate the town and the pride of Shreveport again. I think that may be the best way to move forward.
This is question number 5. What is your view of the current American healthcare landscape, and what congressional action do you believe is necessary to improve it?
Our healthcare is, I'm not sure where we're at healthcare wise. We passed the ACA, and that was closer to, a lot of people are closer to a single payer system is what a lot of people would say. And it is in a way, but it became complicated. It became real top heavy right out of the gate. It became hard to deal with, had a lot of issues. Congress has stripped some of the, like the imposing the tax. It's basically a fee if you don't have insurance. And with someone like me, I used to work on the road. I used to work in oil and gas. And you don't always have insurance. You're not always able to be covered by insurance throughout the year. And there were times that I tried to apply, but the website would be down, it'd be acting funny. So I wound up having to pay a lot of fees every year for insurance. And it's terrible that that's the way it was, but it was so expensive. after ACA, and a lot of times we get this idea that if everybody had to buy insurance, it would become cheaper. But an example that I like to use is whenever we did the auto insurance in the state of Louisiana, they told us our rates would go down. If everybody had it, our rates would go down, but that's not true. Our rates have steadily increased year after year after year. And a lot of that has to do because of your liability minimums. A lot of people only run, I think 40% of the state of Louisiana is got liability on their vehicle. So no one really has adequate insurance to cover medical bills and things, and cars are through the roof right now. If you go buy a new vehicle, so you're getting inadequate insurance at a higher rate, and more people have it, so you feel like, oh, everybody's insured, but that's not the case. Inadequate insurance is just as bad as no insurance. My wife was hit head on about a year ago. She was a little over a year ago. She was hit head on, and the guy's insurance was so minimum that it barely covered our hospital bills. We actually had to go and against our own insurance to try and recover cost of the vehicle, the therapy that she had to go through, the chiropractors, and it becomes a headache. And it took almost a year to settle all of that. And it's the same thing, I believe, when you scale it up. I think it only gets worse when you try to scale up something like that. So when you try to scale up mandatory insurance, it doesn't actually benefit everyone. I believe that when you scale it up like that and everybody has to have it, there's no incentive for insurance companies to compete with one another because you have to have insurance. And when there's only a single person offering insurance, it doesn't matter what they offer whenever you have to buy it. So I believe that the best way would be to try to open competition, maybe interstate. I know some people have talked about being able to buy across state lines, and I'm not honest with you, I'm not 100% how that affects it. I would have to research into that more. But I do believe that we have an opportunity to kind of scale it down if we could pull back government a little bit and the regulations and get more enterprise involved, get more insurance companies on the books and driving competition again. I believe that's probably the best answer.
And number 6, a number of our significant community assets, such as the Cyber Innovation Center, Barksdale Air Force Base, the Red River, and I-49, I-20, depend on federal support. How would you support these initiatives while in the Senate?
The Cyber Innovative Center, honestly, I don't know exactly what that is or what they do. As far as the Air Force Base, we understand that that's going to be fully funded. It's a military base, so that's no worries for it. The I-49, I-20 corridor, I guess the federal dollars come from it because it's an interstate and runs across multiple state lines. So I could see where the federal dollars would come from that. But as I stated earlier, I'm not real big on handing federal dollars down because it's just more tax money going to the states. And the states, like I said, we pay enough taxes in Louisiana. I think that there should be some budgeting issues to start taking place. Eventually, you got to cut somewhere to make room for your other pet projects. And we haven't done a very good job of that throughout the state or throughout the federal government. A lot of times you put in these temporary initiatives and they're only supposed to last for 3 to 5 years. And next thing you know is they're 30 years down the road and we're still paying for all this and they're adding tax on top of it. So I'm not extremely good with putting federal dollars, back into locals. I know sometimes that may be a adverse issue, but we pay lots and lots of taxes in Louisiana, and that should handle all of our roadways. Like I said, I could understand I-20 being that it's a multi-state, but at some point we have to take responsibility that I-20 runs through our state, and maybe we should be the ones responsible for taking care of our roadways, at least by parish. We can do it parish by parish, taking care of their section or helping fund their section of the roadway. Barksdale, if I'm not mistaken, Barksdale did just receive some funds, federal funds, if I'm not mistaken. They had a grant come to them for upgrades and upkeep. And I believe that's something we should maintain is our military bases around the country, making sure that they're ready to go at all times and that they're fully funded. And I would have to read up on the CIC. I'd have to read up on that. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure what they handle there. So
Our area has an abundance of oil and gas resources. At the same time, renewable energy development is expanding across the globe. What role do you believe Congress and the Senate have in helping our region address both of these opportunities?
well, one thing we could do is that right now oil and gas is dominant. There's not a question about it. There's so many more products outside of just fuel that oil and gas supply. Um, I worked with Mortensen building wind turbines, and the blades are they're wood resin, excuse me, and fiberglass. And the fiberglass used has got petroleum products in it. The paint is used as a petroleum-based paint. The hydraulic fluids. I mean, a lot of the wind turbine is actually built with petroleum products, and the coal that it's used to the coal for the steel forges that make the metal. It's just list after list. Some of them are gas fired, but anyway, oil and gas will always have some role until we move. We'd have to advance very far, and I don't think the technology is there for green power. Maybe one day it would be, but right now where we're at, there's this, like I said before, innovation is going to come from competition. It's not going to come from federal government giving a bunch of money to 2 or 3 companies to develop something. It's going to come. Innovation is always driven by competition. That's the story of the American dream. Is competition drives innovation. When we go to work, we're not there to compete with one another, but you want to do the best job you can do. You don't want to be the worst person at work, because if you're the worst, eventually you're going to get cut. Usually the top guy will find his way into a promotion or some type of better situation for himself. So I believe that the government's got to sit back. We can't give a bunch of money to these green deals. I believe we give a lot of tax cuts, I believe, to some of the oil and gas industry. I think we should find a way kind of out of the private sector. I don't believe you should be mingling public and private. Private needs to do their thing. I'm not a fan of bailouts. So you need to let the private sector be the private sector. Businesses come and they'll go, but innovation will eventually drive where we need to go. And the green is coming. I mean, the technology is coming. The studies are coming. There are more and more kids getting involved with STEM field. And I think that's the future. The future is going to be in STEM. So as long as this research keeps coming forward, our kids keep growing towards that. I know it's a popular idea with a lot of people my age and younger, is to move into the green world. So it will be there eventually. But right now, I don't really think that we're at the capacity we need to be to try to swap over to a green system, not independently. There's no way it could function at this time. And nuclear is making advancements, so we can make some advancements in nuclear. That would be amazing. That nuclear would be the absolute best if we could find out a way to get rid of the spent rods out of the nuclear reactors. If we could find out a way to store that or get rid of them completely, I believe nuclear is the absolute answer. It's a zero emission. It would be perfect outside of the radioactive rods. So,
Question 8. Congress has recently passed nearly $5 trillion in stimulus relief to support businesses and individuals during the pandemic. How do you believe Congress should approach addressing these costs over the long term?
well, I know that $5 trillion in stimulus for this relief is a lot of that has gone to the private sector to hold up and supply. I'm not a fan. It's went to a lot of pet projects that both parties hold dear, and I'm not a fan of that. If we were going to give relief to the American people, we should have given it directly to the American people. And to address the long term is where we have to cut. You have to cut the size and scope of the federal government. You cannot expect the government to stay the size it is and on course. I mean, before this, we were already borrowing $1 trillion a year before the pandemic. And this year was looking to be around 1.3 to 1.4 trillion we were going to borrow anyway. So that's on top of what we already have for the stimulus. So we have to cut. Eventually we have to cut. We can tax all we want to, but eventually you have to cut back. There's no way we can survive. This is an unsustainable growth level we have at the federal government. There's more and more programs, more and more personnel. You have a bunch of people that are appointed, not elected. You've got to start cutting it back. You cut back, you shrink the size of the federal government, the scope of the federal government, and you give responsibility back to those states. A lot of those responsibilities are going to go back to the state, and then the state can delegate those to the counties and parishes in which they reside. And you get back to what the founding fathers had originally envisioned, with a strong local and state level government, and then it decreases in its role as it moves towards the top into the federal level. So I believe we start expanding the base of government and give it back to the people in your local levels and place responsibility on their shoulders and go that way. I believe that's the best way, is to, like I said, restrict the size and the scope of the federal level and remove some of these obstacles that are in our way. And if we shrink it, we shrink the cost that it takes to run. We shrink these programs that are overbearing on us, and we can eventually get to a point that we have a surplus and we can start to try to maybe pay down the debt and get it to a manageable level.
Question 9. It appears that partisanship is growing more deeply entrenched in Washington, D.C., and citizens are growing more frustrated with the political process. What will you do to help change that and still remain effective for the state of Louisiana?
Well, I'm running for the Senate, and I'm running to represent the state of Louisiana. I'm listed as a Republican. I call myself a conservative. I believe in true conservative principles, which is the foundation and the protection of individual liberty, small government, less spending, less taxes. That's what I believe to my core. I'm a Christian, and as Christians, we don't see color. We don't see each other in that light. Every Christian is a brother and a sister of mine. So I don't believe I'm going to go there and represent just my party. I would not toe just a party line. I'm going to vote with what I believe is right every time, even if it bucks against the system, because I know what it is. I'm an average guy. I'm a welder by trade, so I spend my time doing jobs that everybody else in the state of Louisiana does. I live my life me and my wife both work. We're a two work income house because that's what we have to be now. That's the reality of our life in the world we live in, is a lot of parents both have to work. We have the same struggles every parent has. We deal with the same thing. And I deal with the same thing that every American male is dealing with right now. How do you continue to provide and give the best life possible to your family? How do you be a father? How do you balance making sure you work enough hours to pay bills and also give enough time to your family to make sure that they don't feel abandoned by you? So I know what it is to be, because I am one. I know what it is to be an average guy. I am the average guy. I don't come from a big background. I don't have a name that resonates with everybody throughout the state. So I understand the struggle, and I believe that would help me in Washington. And being that my life has been so simple and so held back, I don't feel as though I could be bought, because I don't believe a lot of monetary value is needed in life. I live a real simple life myself. And I don't see a big need for worldly objects, and that has to do with my faith too. But I don't see a big need for worldly objects and status and name recognition. I just want to go and serve. I have a heart to serve. I want to serve our state. I want to do what's best for our state, even if that gets me in hot water, even if that bothers people. It's doing what's right doesn't always come with a congratulations and a pat on the back. A lot of times doing the right thing, put your name in a bad spot, and it can get you in a little hot water with some people, but that's okay. We're not afraid of that. I want to go up there and fight the good fight for Louisianians, all Louisianians.
Question 10. The year 2020 has been a challenging one for our nation, with unprecedented levels of healthcare risk, economic disruption, and social unrest. What is your perspective on these issues, and what role do you believe Congress should play in addressing them?
again, I believe that's one of those deals where the government's just got to get out of the way. The unrest, to me, some of it is a lot of it. A lot of it is sensationalized, and it comes from both sides. Both sides want to point out the absolute worst in each other. There's not a whole lot of good that's put on the news. Me and my family, we don't watch a lot of news, and I know that's odd for someone who's running for office. But if you watch too much news and if you take too much of it in, you start to build this internal barrier of almost hate for your fellow American. And I don't believe in that. I don't want to buy into that. I want to see the good in the world. I want to see the good in one another. So as far as the unrest goes, I'm not with the riots and the destruction that I see people share on Facebook. I'm not for all that. I'm not for the riots. I'm not for the destruction of these small businesses. These people work their lives and they've sacrificed and made overcome challenges to have a successful business. For it to be destroyed is disheartening. But I'm also against police brutality. You know, there's always going to be bad eggs in everything. I do believe that the majority of our police are good people, that they're just out there serving their communities because that's what they love to do. That's what they want to do. Maybe they grew up wanting to be a police officer, a firefighter, whatever the case may be. I believe that majority are there just to serve and do what they believe is right. You're going to have those bad apples. I do think that sometimes we're sold a fairy tale, or we're sold lies, and that, like I said again, that comes from both sides. I believe we get told things and it's sensationalized and it's brought to light and it's pushed into our face day after day after day, hours on end, to get a rise. Good news usually doesn't sell as well as bad news does. So the healthcare risk with COVID, I think we should have handled it like we do every other illness outbreak, like we did with Ebola and swine flu. You protect the elderly and the immune compromised. I do not believe we should have shut our economy down. The state right now, we're feeling what those effects have brought. There's a lot of people that have been displaced by Laura that don't have the money to get motel rooms. There's a lot of families that we know that are sleeping in vehicles right now because they were displaced and they'd been out of work for 6 months. And that's aggravating. It's infuriating. I get a little worked up sometimes when I talk about it, and I'm going to try to not today, but it does. It gets to the point that the government the government's job isn't to protect your health. It's to protect your liberty and your rights. And there is a clause in there for emergency powers and public health risk, but we should protect the most. Sorry.
Question 11. This will be your final question and will include your final remarks. Is there anything else you would like to tell us about yourself that we might have not covered?
I think we covered most of everything. Let's say I'm a small government. Small spending, small tax. I believe that the federal government has a very limited role in our day-to-day lives, and the more that it affects our everyday life, probably the worse that it's being managed. We got to rein it in. We need to pull the size and scope down. I believe that more and more we need to have people like me run for office, and Lord willing, a lot of us would make it in there because we understand the struggles. We understand the everyday living that we go through. We're a part of it. We live in this world, and that's one of the things that that's on our platform. A lot of people say they're for term limits. We're not just for term limits. I want to end the congressional pension plan. I want term limits, but I want it to set up to where when you get out of Congress, you got to go back and find a job. You go back to work. You work in the laws, and you work under the circumstances in which you help create. That's how it was intended to be. It wasn't intended to get up there and serve for 20, 30, 40 years. That's never been the intention. A lot of people would argue and say the longer you're there, the more you learn. But I think the longer you're there, the more that you become corrupted by the power. That's the reason we have limitations on the president, is because they said, with too much power for too long corrupts men. And we see it every day. We see what Congress has become. There's a lot of backdoor deals. There's a lot of dirty, nasty things that take place in Washington, and it's time to stop. And the only way to stop it, you could handle the corruption, but I think that would be some kind of lifetime achievement goal. Like it would take more than one person. It would take more than probably take 100 years to try to weed out corruption in Washington, D.C. But there is a growing effort and a growing consensus that we need term limits. And under term limits, you could then work with like-minded people who are wanting to go to serve just to serve. And if you don't have any, if you have no incentive to be there for a long time, and if you have no incentive to stay there until you receive a pension, then your incentive is to go and actually serve your people. Go and actually serve the way you're supposed to, and help benefit the American people, and not just go up there for self-interest, not go up there for a paycheck. You have to come back and work in that. You have to live in the life you created. You don't get to live outside the law. You don't become a prominent member or some elite class of society. And that's my biggest belief. That's my biggest concern, is that we can try to give our liberties back to the American people. We can try to get back to the way that the foundings and intentions of our federal government. And with that, maybe we can start to make the changes in the world that we see, or we want to see. You know, that old saying is be the change in the world, or be the change that you want to see in the world. And that's the only reason we're running. I want to be the change. I want to be different. I want to represent all of Louisiana, and God willing, I get that opportunity.